The thing about civilization, according to the Galactic Exploration Charter, and really according to every species that had ever crawled out of their atmospheric wells and into the black, was that it could be measured precisely by the sophistication of one's tools. The Vrelnari had a saying, "Show me your fabricator, and I'll show you your future." The Kessic philosopher caste went even further, arguing that sentience itself was defined by tool use, which was ironic considering they'd needed the Thros to invent can openers for them 3 centuries ago. Point being, in the year 2847 by human reckoning, the approximately 14,000 member species of the greater galactic community all agreed on one fundamental truth: you were only as advanced as your equipment. And equipment, naturally, came from factories, which came from industrial bases, which came from centuries of technological development. Nobody just made things anymore. That would be absurd. Planetary surveys fell into a comfortable category of predictable work. Team shows up, deploys instruments, collects samples, files reports, goes home. The planets didn't care who was cataloging them, and the survey teams didn't particularly care about the planets beyond whatever data they represented. It was the sort of work that attracted careful, methodical individuals who appreciated the certainty of proper equipment and established protocols. Humanity's addition to this system, some 40 years prior, had been met with the usual bureaucratic skepticism. They were new, they were enthusiastic, and they had an unsettling tendency to volunteer for assignments others found undesirable. But they followed protocols, used standard equipment, and generally didn't cause problems. Adequate, unremarkable, even, which made the current situation all the more unexpected. Survey Team 847 Theta consisted of 5 members, carefully selected for compatibility and expertise. Crix, the team leader, was Vrelnari, a species resembling oversized mantises with an obsession for procedure that bordered on religious fervor. His carapace bore the subtle green patterns that indicated middle management aspirations. Then there was Holvath and Merves, both Kessic, those 6-limbed scholars who communicated as much through color-shifting skin patterns as through actual speech. They handled biological and atmospheric analysis respectively, and had worked together long enough to finish each other's spectrum displays. Quellan, the Thros geological specialist, looked like someone had given a bear opposable thumbs and a deeply anxious personality. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, making them incredibly strong and perpetually worried something was about to fall on them. And then there was Marcus Webb, human, listed as General Operations Specialist, which was corporate speak, for does whatever needs doing. He was average height for his species, brown-skinned, with the kind of quiet competence that meant he usually ended up carrying extra equipment because he didn't complain about it. The planet was designated GX447c in the catalogue. Unofficial designation, honestly pretty unpleasant, but surveyable. It had oxygen, nitrogen, water, plant life of the extremely enthusiastic variety, and weather that couldn't decide between humid and more humid. The kind of place where evolution had gotten aggressive about competing for resources. Not hostile enough to need armed escorts, but definitely the sort of world where you didn't wander away from your equipment. Their shuttle had deposited them at Base Camp Alpha, which was really just a clearing where they'd set up the habitat modules and equipment storage. The plan was simple: 2 weeks of intensive surveying, then extraction. They had everything they needed. Atmospheric processors, scanning equipment, sample analyzers, fabrication units for replacement parts, geological surveying gear, communications arrays, and enough redundancy built into every system that failure was essentially theoretical. The supply transport was supposed to land the next morning with additional equipment for the extended survey range. It was a routine drop, the kind that happened thousands of times daily across surveyed space. Automated, precise, boring. Should have been boring. What actually happened was that the transport's navigation system apparently took the scenic route straight through a freak electromagnetic storm that the planet's atmosphere decided to throw at exactly the wrong moment, causing the ship to auger into the side of a mountain approximately 40 kilometers away. The automated distress signal lasted just long enough to confirm that yes, something had gone catastrophically wrong, before the wreckage was consumed by what the sensors cheerfully identified as an indigenous microbial bloom that found refined metals delicious. That would have been survivable, inconvenient certainly, but they had their base equipment. Except the electromagnetic pulse from the storm had traveled ahead of the crash, and their habitat modules, being electronic, had taken the full brunt of it. Every circuit, every processor, every power cell fried, comprehensively, enthusiastically fried. Crick stood in the clearing, staring at equipment that had cost more than some planetary GDP, now reduced to expensive paperweights. His mandibles clicked in what could only be described as the Vrelnari equivalent of hysterical disbelief. "This is impossible," he said, which was not technically true but emotionally accurate. "We have redundancies, we have backups, we have protocols for equipment failure, we have slag." Merves corrected, his skin flashing a sickly yellow-gray that indicated deep pessimism. The protocols assumed gradual failure, not complete systemic annihilation. Holvath was already running calculations, his own skin pulsing with mathematical symbols. "Rescue beacon is non-functional. Standard protocol puts emergency retrieval at 47 days for a missed check-in. Accounting for our supplies," he paused, color draining to pale white. "We have 3 days of concentrated rations." 3 days? Quellen's fur bristled with anxiety. On a planet where everything grows aggressively, how do we survive 47 days? "We don't," Creek said flatly. "Not according to any civilized standard. Without tools, without equipment, we simply wait and hope." The word civilized hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, walking the perimeter of their ruined camp. He picked up a scanning device, watched it fail to even power on, and set it down carefully. Then he looked out at the forest surrounding them, dense, green, and very much alive. 47 days, he said finally. "That's actually not that bad." 4 alien heads turned to stare at him. "Not that bad." Creeks's mandibles splayed in disbelief. "Webb, we have no tools, no equipment, no means of fabrication. How exactly is this not that bad?" Marcus gestured at the forest. "Wood, stone, water, plenty of material to work with. Material requires tools to process," Mervis said slowly, as if explaining basic physics to a child. "Tools require fabrication. Fabrication requires other tools." "Yeah," Marcus interrupted. "Or you just make the first tool." The silence that followed was profound. "Make a tool," Creeks repeated. "You're suggesting we manufacture equipment. Here, with what fabrication base?" "With rocks and sticks mostly." Marcus was already moving toward the tree line. "Give me an hour." He disappeared into the forest before anyone could formulate a response. "He's had a mental break," Quellen announced. "The stress has fractured his cognitive processes. Humans are fragile," Holvath agreed, though his colors flickered uncertainly. "Perhaps we should leave him," Creeks decided. "We need to inventory what food remains and establish a rationing protocol. Webb can process his distress in whatever manner his species requires." What Marcus was actually doing, roughly 200 meters into the forest, was shopping. Not in the traditional sense, obviously, but with the same focused intent. He was looking for specific things, a particular type of stone, hard, fractures predictably, a particular type of wood, strong, straight grain, and vine specimens, fibrous, flexible. The aliens, had they been watching, would have been baffled by the selection process. Marcus passed over dozens of perfectly good rocks before finding one that made him nod with satisfaction. He tested branches by bending them, listening to how they creaked. He stripped sections of vine and twisted them experimentally. After 40 minutes, he returned to camp, carrying an armload of what appeared to be garbage. Feeling better? Creeks asked with forced gentleness. Much better, Marcus said, setting down his collection. Now I need everyone to not panic about what happens next. Why would we panic? Mervis asked. Marcus picked up 2 stones and struck them together sharply. A flake of rock splintered off, leaving a sharp edge. He struck them again, more precisely this time, and another flake detached. Because this is going to look really primitive. 5 minutes later, Marcus held up his first creation, a hand axe. It wasn't beautiful, just a palm-sized stone, with one edge sharp enough to cut, wrapped at the base with vine to protect his hand. It looked like something from a museum. A very old museum. Possibly one focused on before civilization. That's a rock, Quillen said. It's an axe, Marcus corrected, walking over to a fallen branch and swinging the stone down. It bit into the wood with a solid thunk, splitting fibers. See? Cuts. You made a cutting implement from unprocessed materials, Holvarth said, his skin cycling through colors that indicated complete confusion. Without fabrication equipment. Yep. Marcus was already working on another stone, this time creating a more refined edge. And now that I have one tool, I can make better tools. That's kind of the whole thing with tools. They make other tools possible. This is insane, Creeks muttered. You can't bootstrap an entire technological base from rocks. Can't bootstrap to space travel. No, Marcus agreed. But for not dying in the woods for 47 days, this'll do fine. Over the next hour, while the aliens huddled together discussing the humans' apparent psychotic episode, Marcus worked with focused intensity. The sharp stones became sharper. Branches were stripped and shaped. Vines were separated into fibers and twisted into cordage, actual rope, made from plant matter, which seemed to violate several laws of reasonable behavior. By the time the local sun began setting, Marcus had created 3 progressively better hand axes, 2 wooden mallets branches with heavier wood sections shaped and secured, a bow drill fire starter, and about 30 meters of rough rope. Watch this, he called to his team, who were maintaining a careful distance, as if wilderness madness might be contagious. He arranged the bow drill components, a straight stick, a curved branch with cordage, a flat piece of wood, and some dried plant matter. The aliens watched skeptically as he began moving the bow back and forth, spinning the stick against the wood. He's rubbing sticks together, Mervis narrated unnecessarily. This is a regression to pre-sentient behavior. Smoke began rising from the wood. He's making smoke, Holvarth added. I'm not sure why, but flame sparked in the dried plant matter. He's made fire. Quillen jumped back. Uncontained combustion. This is a safety violation. This is dinner, Marcus corrected, carefully nurturing the flame until it caught properly on a prepared pile of wood. He looked up at his teammates, face illuminated by firelight, grinning. Also, I think I saw some edible tubers back in the forest. Anyone hungry? The next morning, while the aliens were still processing the existence of fire without technology, Marcus was already expanding operations. The problem, he explained to nobody in particular, since the aliens were still maintaining their distance, is that stone tools are great, but they're slow. What I need is metal. You need a fabrication facility and refined materials. Crix called from across the clearing. Which we don't have. I need fire hot enough to melt metal, and metal to melt, Marcus corrected. Which, as it happens, this planet has both. He'd spent the early morning locating a clay deposit near a stream. Now he was shaping that clay into a rough bowl-like structure, packing it carefully around stones to create a chamber. It looked like a very sad sculpture. What is that? Mervis finally asked, curiosity overcoming skepticism. Forge, Marcus said. Or it will be once it dries and I fire it. See, you pack clay around a chamber, leave holes for airflow, get it hot enough, and you can melt metal. You don't have metal, Holvath pointed out. Marcus gestured at a pile of reddish rocks he'd collected. Limonite, iron ore. Not pure but with flux, which I can make from limestone and wood ash. I can extract workable iron. The silence that followed was different from previous silences. This one had weight. You're describing pre-industrial metallurgy, Crix said slowly, from raw materials. That requires knowledge of chemistry, geology, and materials science. It requires knowing that red rocks plus hot fire equals metal. Marcus shrugged. Humans figured it out a few thousand years ago. It's not rocket science. It's literally the opposite of rocket science. But why do humans know this? Quellen asked plaintively. Why is this information in your educational curriculum? Marcus paused in his clay shaping. I mean, some people just like knowing how things work. How they started, plus camping, survival hobbies, historical reenactment. He caught their expressions. You guys don't have survival hobbyists. Why would we? Mervis asked. We have technology. We have equipment. We don't practice being primitive. Yeah, well, Marcus returned to his work. Guess that's biting you in the ass right now, isn't it? Over the next 3 days, the workshop took shape. The forge was completed first, a clay furnace with a bellows system. Marcus fashioned from treated animal hide, from a creature that had very unfortunately decided to investigate the camp and wooden pipes. It looked absurd. It also worked, heating the chamber hot enough to glow when the bellows were pumped. The aliens watched, somewhere between horrified and fascinated, as Marcus processed ore into a rough iron bloom. It wasn't pretty, full of impurities and slag, but after heating, hammering with a stone anvil and wooden mallet, heating again, and more hammering, it became a recognizable metal blade. That's a knife, Holvath said, stating the obvious having become a coping mechanism. You made a knife from rocks and fire. I made a very bad knife, Marcus corrected, examining the blade critically. But now I can make better knives, and then tools, and then better tools. The work area expanded daily. Marcus built a proper shelter using logs he'd felled with his improving axes, lashed together with increasingly sophisticated rope. He created a water collection and filtration system using woven plant fibers and charcoal. He even built a rudimentary lathe by mounting a log horizontally and rotating it with a bow drill mechanism, allowing him to shape wood with surprising precision. By day 5, Crix approached the workshop, because that's what it had become, with something approaching awe. You've created a functional operations base, he said quietly. From nothing, from stuff that was already here, Marcus corrected, working on shaping a piece of metal into a chisel. Nature provides the materials, you just have to know how to ask nicely. This knowledge, Merves ventured, his colors shifting to curious amber. All humans possess this. Not all, but plenty. It's considered a useful skill set. Plus, fun. Fun, Quellen repeated. You find regressing to pre-technological survival enjoyable. Marcus looked up from his work. I find knowing I can take care of myself enjoyable, that I'm not helpless if the technology fails. That statement hung in the air while the aliens contemplated their own helplessness of the past few days. Could you, Holvarth started hesitantly. Could you teach us? Marcus grinned. Was wondering when you'd ask. Week 2 saw the entire team integrated into workshop operations. Turns out, having 6 limbs made the Keswick naturally gifted at rope making. Quellen's strength meant he could work the bellows for extended periods, keeping the forge at optimal temperature. Crix's attention to detail translated well to the precise work of tool refinement. The workshop expanded from basic survival to actual productivity. Marcus built a better forge with improved airflow. He created a trip hammer system using a water wheel in the nearby stream, because why pump bellows manually when gravity and flowing water could do it for you? The team started producing actual survey equipment equivalents, measuring rods, sample containers from fired clay, even a rudimentary sextant for navigation using polished metal and carved wood. This is still primitive compared to our technology, Crix insisted, but the protest was half-hearted. He was too busy carefully crafting a set of calipers to sound convincing. Sure, Marcus agreed. But primitive that works beats advanced that doesn't. By day 30, the workshop was genuinely impressive. A casual observer might mistake it for a historical recreation rather than an active survival operation. The forge produced consistent metal stock. The shelter had expanded into a multi-room structure with a raised floor to prevent moisture damage. They'd even created a basic filtration system for the stream water that Mervis insisted on testing 3 times because he couldn't believe plant fiber and charcoal actually removed contaminants. Food was plentiful. Turns out the aggressive growth that made the planet annoying also meant abundant edible plants once you knew what to look for. Marcus had taught the team to identify safe options, and Quellen had discovered he had a talent for foraging, his anxious attention to detail perfect for spotting the difference between nutritious and will make you very regret eating that. They'd even managed to continue some survey work. The tools weren't as precise as their original equipment, but careful measurement and observation still yielded usable data. Crix maintained meticulous notes using ink made from plant dyes and paper from processed plant fibers, because apparently you could make paper too, which the Keswick found almost more disturbing than the metallurgy. We're successfully operating a survey mission using pre-industrial technology, Holvarth marveled, carefully updating their star charts with the handmade sextant. This should not be possible. It's extremely possible, Marcus said. It's just extremely inconvenient. On day 39, they spotted the rescue ship descending through the atmosphere. The team gathered in the clearing, now unrecognizable from the disaster site it had been, and watched as the sleek vessel settled down with a hum of modern propulsion. The boarding ramp extended, and a Vrelnari officer emerged, datapad in hand already speaking. Survey Team 847 Theta, we received your distress signal and have arrived to extract you from this unfortunate situation. We understand all equipment was destroyed, and you've been surviving without. He stopped. He stared. Behind the team was a fully functional wilderness workshop complete with forge, lathe, carpentry area, clay firing kiln, and organized tool storage. Smoke rose from a carefully banked fire. A water wheel turned lazily in the stream, powering bellows and a trip hammer. Drying racks held processed plant fibers. Metal tools hung from a handmade rack, organized by function. "What?" the officer started, then stopped. "What is this?" "Survey operations," Creek said with dignity. "Adapted for circumstances. You made this. Without equipment." "We made the equipment," Marcus corrected. "Then we made more equipment with that equipment. It's equipment all the way down, really." The rescue officer walked through the workshop like someone touring a museum exhibit. He picked up a hand-forged chisel, tested its edge, and set it down carefully as if it might bite him. "This is a functional metallurgical operation," he said faintly. "You created a functional metallurgical operation from rocks and sticks," Quellen added helpfully. "Don't forget the sticks. The human did most of the initial work," Mervis explained, his colors showing pride. "But he taught us the principles. We've all contributed to expanding operations." "The human," the officer repeated, locating Marcus. "You knew how to do this. All of this." Marcus shrugged. "Some of it from school, some from hobbies, some from just thinking through problems. It's not that complicated once you understand the basics." "Not that complicated," the officer echoed. He looked at his data pad, then at the workshop, then back at his pad like it might have different information if he checked again. "I need to file a report about this. How do I classify? Successful mission completion," Crix suggested. "We've maintained survival and continued survey operations despite total equipment loss. That seems like a positive outcome." "You're not supposed to be able to continue operations without equipment," the officer said weakly. "The protocols assume equipment loss means mission failure. Maybe the protocols need updating," Marcus suggested. The extraction team spent an hour documenting the workshop, taking images and notes with the kind of intensity usually reserved for archaeological discoveries. Which, in a way, this was proof that everything they took for granted about civilization and technology could be replicated from first principles by someone with the knowledge and will to try. Finally, the rescue officer turned to Marcus. "We'll need to debrief you extensively about these techniques. This information could be valuable for emergency protocols across the survey fleet." "Sure," Marcus agreed. "Though honestly, most of this is just basic human history. We could skip the debrief and I could just send you some book recommendations." "Books," the officer said. "You have educational materials about primitive survival techniques. We have entire libraries about it. History, practical guides, hobby manuals. Humans are really into knowing how our ancestors did things." "Why?" Marcus considered the question while looking at the workshop they'd built, the tools they'd made, the skills they'd learned. "Because," he said finally, "it's important to know that if everything fails, if every piece of technology breaks down, and every advanced system stops working, we're not helpless. We can still make things. We can still solve problems. We're still capable." The officer looked at his sophisticated data pad, then at the hand-forged tools, then back at his pad. "That's a very unsettling perspective." "Or comforting," Crix interjected. "Depending on your situation." The team was extracted successfully, along with as many handmade tools as they could carry for documentation purposes. The workshop remained behind, a monument to capability and stubbornness on a planet that didn't care about either. The official report, filed 3 days later, caused considerable discussion in Survey Command. Questions were raised about training protocols, equipment redundancy, and the philosophical implications of humans casually possessing knowledge that rendered technological civilization optional rather than necessary. One commander, reading the report for the 5th time, turned to her aide. "So the human just made everything, including a functioning forge." "Including a functioning forge," the aide confirmed. from clay, rocks, and determination, and taught the others. Apparently all of them can now perform basic metallurgy. The Vrelnari team leader included it on his skills update form. The commander sat back, contemplating this. You know what the terrifying part is? That humans consider this basic knowledge, that they consider this a hobby. She pulled up human cultural files on her display. There are millions of them who practice these skills for recreation. For fun, they deliberately make things harder for themselves to prove they can still do it the old way. The commander thought about survey teams stranded with broken equipment, colonies facing supply disruptions, explorers venturing into unknown territories. She thought about the comfortable assumption that civilization meant dependence on technology, and the unsettling revelation that for at least one species, civilization meant maintaining the knowledge to rebuild everything from scratch if necessary. Because, she said slowly, they remember what it took to build all this, and they don't ever want to forget. She marked the report for fleet-wide distribution with a note, required reading for all survey personnel, especially the part about the rocks. Back on GX 447C, the workshop sat quiet in the clearing. The forge remained, clay hardened and ready for use. The tools hung in organized rows. The water wheel still turned when the stream ran high, powering nothing now but serving as proof of concept. And if future survey teams landed on that world and wondered at the structure they found, this combination of primitive technique and sophisticated understanding, they might eventually understand the real lesson. Civilization wasn't about having the best tools. It was about knowing how to make them when you had nothing. Everything else was just convenience. And convenience, as Survey Team 847 Theta could attest, was entirely optional.